on Tuesday, the 17th of December. Welcome in particular to those in the public gallery. You're most welcome, and to our public speakers, thank you for attending, also to members of the press. I will start by introducing the officers. To my right is Mr. Ollie Bolter, who's the Strategic Manager for Planning and Infrastructure. Ms. Sarah Wilkinson is not with us today. To Mr. Bolter's right, Mr. Russell Chick, he is a Planning and Development Manager. Mr. Stuart van Kullenberg is our Principal Planning Officer. Mr. Neil Troughton is the Highways Representative for Island Roads. Mr. Ben Gard on my left is our Legal Advisor, assisted by Jodie Gibson, also a Legal Advisor, and Ms. Marie Bartlett is our Committee Clerk. And Councillor Paul Fuller, Cabinet Member for Planning, Coastal Protection and Flooding, is over the other side of the room. A few housekeeping elements. There are no planned fire drills during the meeting, so if you hear the fire alarm, please treat it as a real emergency and evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route, which is via the signposted set of stairs to your left as you leave the council chamber or the public gallery. Exit via the door at the back of the building, walk across the inner car park around the building to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. Lifts can't be used in the event of an emergency. Please don't re-enter the building until you're advised it's safe to do so by a member of council staff. I could ask everyone just to check that your phones are switched off or to mute. And for all speakers to use the microphones. So it's the silver button to the right that engages the microphone. Please also just remember to turn it off once you have finished speaking so that others can. If I could ask that no food is consumed during the meeting unless it is for a medical need. And members will be aware that you cannot leave the council chamber during the presentation or the debate. If you do so, you'll be unable to vote. Members of the public, I appreciate these can be sometimes emotive issues, but if I could ask that you're here purely to observe applause and other sort of interjections, though I can understand where it comes from. We have to make sure that people have the opportunity to speak without any form of intimidation. I will run through the lighting system. So when you're asked to speak, the green light will display. Then the amber light will flash for a few seconds when you need to start wrapping up. And then when the red light displays, I will stop you talking, and that's to ensure that all parties receive the same amount of time. So we move then to the agenda. Apologies, we've had apologies from Councillor Palin. We have a substitution. Councillor Ellis is joining in the place of Councillor Matt Price, who will be speaking as the local member for our first agenda item. Welcome, Councillor Ellis. We move then to the previous meeting minutes. Are there any addendums or errata? If not, can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Proposer, thank you. Councillor Quirk, seconder. Anyone? Councillor Andre, thank you very much. All in favour? Splendid. Declarations of interests. Thank you. We move then to our public question time. We have had a written submission, which I will read out unless Ms. Jones is in the gallery and wishes to ask it herself. I think maybe not, so I shall read it. Quote, in the light of the recent publication of the new NPPF dated the 12th of December 2024 and the provisions of paragraph 234B, can the Isle of Wight Council confirm that they will be withdrawing their submitted plan, given that the standard housing requirement for the island is over 1,000 units per annum and that the new plan does not meet 80% of this annual requirement, and commence working on a new plan to make provision for the needs of island residents who are desperate for housing? I'm going to turn to Mr. Bolter, who's going to read the response on behalf of the Planning Authority. Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. So in response to the written question, the written response is as follows. The Council can confirm that it will not be withdrawing its submitted plan. Paragraph 234 of the NPPF dated 12th of December 2024 states, for the purpose of preparing local plans, the policies in this version of the framework will apply from the 12th of March, other than where one or more of the following apply. As identified in the question, the criteria of paragraph 234 that applies to the Isle of Wight Council is B, which states, the plan has been submitted for examination under Regulation 22 on or before the 12th of March 2025. The Isle of Wight Council submitted the draft island planning strategy for examination under Regulation 22 on the 31st of October 2024, which aligns with bullet B above as it is before the 12th of March. Paragraph 235 then states, where paragraph 234A, B, C, D or E apply, the plan will be examined under the relevant previous version of the framework. Therefore, the draft island planning strategy will be examined under the December 2023 version of the NPPF. As paragraph 234B applies to the Isle of Wight Council, so does paragraph 236. This paragraph states, where paragraph 234B applies, if the housing requirement in the plan to be adopted meets less than 80% of local housing need, the local planning authority will be expected to begin work on a new plan under the revised plan making system in order to address the shortfall in housing need. On the 15th of November 2024, planning inspectors were appointed for the examination of the draft island planning strategy. And on the 4th of December 2024, the inspectors wrote to the council with proposed hearing dates, being the end of February, early March 2025. All information relating to the examination process can be found online on the dedicated draft island planning strategy examination web pages. The Isle of Wight Council continues to engage with the examination process for the draft island planning strategy and looks forward to receiving the matters, issues and questions from the inspectors before the end of December 2024. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. We'll have that circulated to the member of the public who submitted the question and to members of the Planning Committee. Are there any further public questions? We've received no written representations other than that. If not, we will move on. We move then to agenda item. Oh, sorry, Councillor Jones-Evans.
Sorry, I had a declaration of interest, non-pecuniary. The landscape lane, so item number 1. There's submission from Newport Community Council's Planning Committee, of which I am a member, but I was not present during this meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Noted. Splendid. We will move then to agenda item 5. Yes.
In the light of Councillor Jones-Evans's remarks, I'm also a member of Newport and Carisbrooke Community Council, and I never take place in any planning deliberations on that council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. Excellent. We will move forwards. No, Councillor Oliver. Thank you.
Ditto me.
Certainly. Excellent. Okay. Great. Agenda item 5, our planning report from our strategic manager. This is in relation to the new NPPF, which has been published very recently, which we will need to take into consideration. I believe all members have seen the briefing that's been circulated. Hopefully you should also have a hard copy too. Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, councillors. And just before the case officer moves to their presentations this evening, I would just like to take the opportunity to confirm with councillors that, as explained in the briefing note that the Chair has just referenced and was circulated yesterday to all members of the Planning Committee, all decisions made by the LPA are now under the December 2024 NPPF. So, for those of you who may not be aware, the government published a revised NPPF on the 12th of December, and that was effective immediately from the point of publication. Which was after when the reports in front of you were published. So what members will see from in front of them is the update paper that officers have checked the reports and provided you with some commentary on any changes affecting the items for consideration this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't know if any colleagues have questions regarding this before we commence, but if not, we will move to the agenda items. So our first item is reference 21/02423/0 OUT, which is land at Landscape Lane, Newport, Isle of Wight. So we will have the public presentation and then we will proceed to the public comments. Thank you. Mr. Van Collenberg.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, councillors. This planning application relates to part of an agricultural field located to the western side, the eastern side of Newport. The application abuts the eastern side of Landscape Lane, and to the north is Staplers Road, and to the south is Long Lane. The application site measures about 0.88 of a hectare and forms part of a larger agricultural field that's currently used for arable farming. Just to remind members of some photographs of the site of surrounding area. So the first photograph shows the junction with Staplers Road. The second photograph here shows number 49 Long Lane and the junction with Long Lane and Landscape Lane. We have another photograph that is looking northwards along the Landscape Lane, and we have access to the existing residential property here and the roadside hedgerow boundary that runs along the eastern side of the lane and the western side of the application site. And then there's two more photos here that are taken from the adjacent agricultural field, and that is looking towards the Landscape Lane boundary here, and this is the boundary with Staplers Road along here. And again, this is looking back towards the site to the east and the wider agricultural field beyond. This is an extract from the ecology report. So just in terms of habitats on site for members, we have the roadside hedgerow. The agricultural field is generally devoid of any features. It's mainly used for agricultural arable farming. We have an existing domestic hedgerow to the south and existing residential property Long Lane. And then we have the trees and an existing hedgerow that form the off-site boundary to the north. In terms of the proposal is to develop that part of the site for 12 houses. The indicative plans we have show that these would be bungalows. The remainder would be two-storey housing. There would be a new access that would be formed in the sort of south western corner of the site, and that would be approximately 5.5 metres wide at its narrowest point, and that would extend back in, and members will note the new access on-site road would be about 5.5 metres wide, but there would be localised narrowings of 3.7, which would be wide enough for a fire, appliance and service vehicle to access the site. Turning head would be provided at the end of the cul-de-sac. In terms of the arrangement, it's pretty linear. These properties follow on roughly in position with these dwellings here, and it's very much linear, set back from the road, rear gardens and frontage soft landscaping. Members will note that the changes to the roadside boundary of Landscape Lane will mean that the majority of the existing roadside hedgerow would be lost. This green hedgerow through here is all new planting. So if I just run my cursor through, so this is all new planting through here. Members will note that as well as the access punctuating through here, there would also be a new 1.8 metre footpath that would run round to roughly where the substation is here and the site. And I'll come on to the adjoining connectivity works in a minute for that. This yellow line here reflects the current alignment of indicatively of where the existing hedgerow is. So you get a rough idea of where the new hedgerow would be aligned, where the existing hedgerow currently sits in relation to that. So members note that it's pretty close, but ultimately there would be a loss of that hedgerow and there would be some modifications to take into account the new access arrangements and the visibility displays for the new vehicle junction. Just taking a look at that in a sort of street scene look, that gives members an idea of the scale of the housing that's proposed. This property over on the right here is the existing property at Long Lane, and again the two-storey housing and bungalows that are proposed. Some sections that are taken through the site. Again, this gives members an idea of the level of Landscape Lane, the rise to the bungalows that are at the northern end of the site. So again, members will note the sections taken through the northern end here where the bungalows are proposed. And again, this is more central through the site where the two-storey housing is proposed. Again, you'll notice the profile of the land that's proposed. And this one is taken at the other end of the site, the southern end of the site. This outline here is the existing property, 48 Long Lane. And then obviously this building here is the end property. And this property here is this one that's slightly inset nearer where the access would be. Taking a look at the highways arrangement, so the proposal is to widen Landscape Lane at this point here. So that would give us a 5.5 metre wide width for two vehicles to pass. and the new junction formed here with the adequate visibility displays with the hedgerow set behind. There is no footpath that's proposed here. Main reason behind that is that we couldn't get it to, or in discussions with the applicant, the only way of providing a footway there would have resulted in conflict between service vehicles and refuse vehicles turning this corner. And any footpath here would have meant that if people were walking along here, there potentially may have been a collision risk. So that was taken out of the initial schemes. Turning to the Landscape Lane junction. So again, this is the Landscape Lane junction with Staplers Road. So it's proposed to widen the lane at this point here to 5.5 metres in width. There would be a repositioning of the centre line, and that would improve visibility at that junction. It is also proposed to provide a pedestrian crossing, an uncontrolled pedestrian crossing, approximately in this position, albeit you'll note that the plans say that the finalised position of that crossing is to be agreed under highway agreement and the section 06 agreement that's proposed. Another off-site works that are proposed would be a new bus shelter outside 187 Staplers Road. And there would be some localised footway dropping, curb dropping, which would provide the ability for people on this side of the road to alight the bus and come out the live carriageway, whereas currently that curb is raised. So it would make it more difficult for those with accessibility problems to negotiate that. So that would be generally an improvement to the current situation. Again, just so you can take some photos looking at the current bus stops here and here, and the current bus lay-by. So again, we're talking about some footway improvements here to enable people to come across the road if necessary to get onto the public footpath, whereas at the moment they'd have to negotiate the raised curbing. And again, this is looking eastwards where the existing substation is, and where the proposed footpath would come and join the pedestrian crossing that would come across Staplers Road at this point. And that's the proposal. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much, Mr. van Cuylenburg. We turn then to the public speaking elements of this agenda item. If I could invite then Ms. Jane Lauer, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, to speak. You have 3 minutes when you commence. Thank you.
Landscape Lane has been blighted for over 4 years by this proposed ribbon development on agricultural land. Our family has lived on the lane for decades, so we know the site very well. This field and bump hedgerow are on the 1793 Ordnance Survey map, predating the Enclosure Act 1845. That means the hedgerow could be considered important. This scheme fails to comply with policy SP1. In all cases, development on non-previously developed land will need to clearly demonstrate how it will enhance the character and context of the local area. Layout is not a reserved matter, but there has been no landscape visual impact appraisal. The layout before the committee shows a dated, low-density development extending urban sprawl into open countryside. The site is a 1.3-mile walk from the town centre, and there are no safe cycling routes, so it does not comply with policy DM17. Development should provide and improve accessibility for pedestrian, cycling, equestrian and public transport, especially safer routes to schools. The visibility displays showed on the plans depend on third-party private land not owned by the applicant. Also, the proposal to install a pedestrian crossing on Staplers Road is unrealistic. The comment about this crossing by Island Roads was based on inaccurate plans of Staplers Road driveways, so a crossing can't be relied on. The substation blocks the verge to the east, and there's no space on the verge to the west either. This does not comply with policy DM2. Development proposals will be expected to provide an attractive, functional, accessible, safe and adaptable built environment. Landscape Lane would have one small passing bay on the inside of the bend, which would lead to conflict between vehicles. This lane is clearly not suitable for intensification as it already suffers from rat running. In the Regulation 19 local plan, policy H4 says housing outside the settlement boundaries will only be supported where it would be infilling a small gap in a row of houses between 1 and 3 dwellings. Policy H4 is clear that the council should not support this scheme. Hundreds of objections have been made, but no positive comments. We fully support the objections of the Community Council. The revised plans have not addressed any of the objections on pedestrian safety. Southern Water can't support the scheme because of lack of information on foul drainage, and the planning officer's report says SUDs are unviable on the site. Relying on the combined sewer is seriously out of date. The island needs new housing, but this is not the right place for it. There are many brownfield sites much closer to town. The council made the right decision to refuse development of this site in 2020 and can do so again. We request that this unsustainable scheme is refused planning permission as the adverse impacts significantly outweigh the benefits.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. We turn now to Mr. Edward Nicholson, who's speaking on behalf of the CPRE. Mr. Nicholson, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Edward Nicholson. And as just said, I'm speaking on behalf of the CPRE Isle of Wight, of which I'm chair. We are dealing with a small project here on a greenfield site, which has previously been rejected. It has now been resubmitted, but has continued to attract a considerable level of opposition. In the planning report, it refers to 133 dissenters, although I could only find 70 on the website, of which 65 were negative and the balance neutral. This is not exactly a ringing endorsement from the community. The objectors include the local council, which lists the following grounds for objection. The site is not adjacent to a settlement boundary and is not infill. It's a greenfield site when there are many brownfield sites which would accommodate a project of this size. Traffic and pedestrian safety issues will, I'm sure, be highlighted. It doesn't meet the local housing needs. It's a loss of farmland. It's a damage to the rural appearance. And in short, there's nothing substantive that has changed since it was last rejected. The CPRE has submitted 2 objections to the proposal. These include many of the same arguments that I've just mentioned. Specifically, it's a greenfield site, it's not adjacent to any settlement, it's remote from the town centre, there's no assessment of landscape impact, it's a rural location being inappropriately urbanised. Thus, the CPRE strongly believes that the proposal should again be rejected. We find it hard to understand that a project which has attracted such significant negative sentiment, including from the local council, and without any obvious compelling merit, should be recommended. Members of the council, this is the wrong location for this project. It is now your job to please bring your collective wisdom to this proposal and reject it as previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson. We turn now to Mr. Phil Salmon, who is the agent for the application. Mr. Salmon, you have 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a revised scheme submitted in 2021, the original having submitted the previous year. This current scheme has sought to overcome reasons for refusal. Since its resubmission, the design and development team has continued to work with officers to ensure that all relevant planning issues have been addressed appropriately, including comments raised by third parties. The site is owned by a long-standing Isle of Wight family who have brought it forward for development. It has previously been deemed developable and deliverable by the local planning authority under its strategic housing land availability assessment. The proposals now before committee have evolved and deal successfully with the following matters: the mix of housing types, highways and pedestrian accessibility, archaeology, drainage, layout and scale of development, roof design, landscaping. I'd like to thank the efforts of the planning officer who has worked with us proactively to ensure that the right balance has been struck between securing legitimate environmental benefits and delivering much needed housing in a sustainable location. The scheme is fully compliant with the adopted local planning policy and now with the new national planning policy framework published just at the end of last week. Housing need for the island under new calculation methods now rests at over 1,000 dwellings per year, whilst the submitted island planning strategy provides for just 453 per year. This is reflective of historic underachievement of housing delivery against actual need. Whilst this is now a matter between the local planning authority and the planning inspectorate to resolve, the underlying issue remains the same. There are not enough houses being built, evident by the lack of opportunities for local people to rent or buy or to move within the housing market. Opportunities for upsizing and downsizing is extremely limited. First-time buyers and renters are finding it extremely difficult to find appropriate accommodation. We are very much in a housing crisis. And this is without mentioning record levels of young people and children living in unsuitable temporary accommodation. Turning back to the scheme itself, the merits are considerable and are as follows. The rural character of Landscape Lane is broadly maintained through careful preservation of hedgerow character and provision of new landscaping. Vehicular access to the lane itself is improved, not by changing the carriageway, but by the provision of passing bays, thus preserving the rural character. The carriageway junction and visibility will be enhanced at Staplers Road End, and this is supported by Island Roads. Pedestrian access is improved significantly with the provision of a segregated footway. Currently, pedestrians will walk within the vehicular carriageway, which creates risk. Proposed houses are to be set back from the lane, and roof designs are now hit to ensure appropriate spacing and allowance of views through the site. Contributions are ensured towards upgraded bus stops and the provision of affordable housing. On-site ecology is to be enhanced, with the existing hedgerow is shown to have little ecological value. New hedgerows will encourage biodiversity through more appropriate native species, encouraging habitat. This is a small-scale development, attractive for island-based building contractors. The application proposals are precisely the type of project which the new NPPF encourages, especially where identified performance on housing delivery is poor. Fundamentally, we now have a revised scheme resulting from proactive discussions between officers and the application team that remains deliverable whilst providing new homes contributing towards meeting local need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salmon. We turn now to the local councillor, Councillor Matthew Price. I did have a question referred to me prior to committee convened in relation to the 6-minute timing limits. In my estimation, it would be somewhat perverse to, as it were, set back a local councillor who is also a member of this committee. So I'm going to exercise my discretion in terms of the time limit. I would suggest that Councillor Price has, by recusing himself, as it were, done the right thing in relation to the code of conduct. So, as I say, to in some way limit him to 6 minutes, but I will perhaps encourage him to speak as concisely as he can. Councillor Price, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I will use my own unique way of representing my local residents here today, and I apologise for anything that I repeat, and hope you can bear with me and not become too bored of the things I'm about to say. I just want to thank Mrs. Lower's excellent comments and presentation, and for the comments from the CPRE, which I think are all very, very relevant. In nearly 12 years on this committee, I've only ever successfully called in one previous application for consideration. I've always successfully worked with officers and residents to find the most amicable solution. So I've not brought this to committee lightly. I'm far from anti-development and fully appreciate the need for housing. And the need is where this application falls at the first hurdle. The first preparations for this application started back in 2019. And then the application finally went live in 2020. This application was for 14 houses and was refused for many of the reasons this application should also be refused for. And regardless of the reduction in units and remodelling, many of the original reasons for that refusal do still exist. I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about the highway and footway network. And this latest application that went live over Christmas 2021, a time period that I'm always a little bit suspicious of, because it tends to reduce the public consultation by the nature that it's over the Christmas period. The original highway and footway network was largely the same as the previous application, which would have allowed for the footpath to link along, would have allowed the footpath to link Long Lane and Staplers Road fully, which would at least provide a safe and sustainable route to and from this development, but would also link the local area to the nearby school, the country park and other local amenities. But due to one end of Landscape Lane not having the required sweep for refuse vehicles, this was recommended for refusal by Island Roads. Then in January this year, a revised highway layout was submitted, removing all pedestrian access from the Long Lane end of Landscape Lane entirely, thus going against the council's own policy of sustainable travel in semi-rural areas by failing to provide a safe pedestrian route. It has also taken away the only slither of improvement for the local area by removing this. You will also recall that this application was pulled from the committee consideration a couple of months ago, as the new highway layout was not contained clearly within the public consultation documents. And I would argue that this is still very ambiguous and difficult to understand now. Please, committee members, do hold weight to this. This issue is a huge failure and would not connect this site to the footpath network at both ends of Landscape Lane, regardless of the land ownership, and thus provide improvement through development. Can also mention that neither the applicant or their agent, to my knowledge, has made any attempt to secure land or even so much as approach nearby residents to try and deliver additional land that would be needed to deliver an acceptable footpath that would meet with Island Road's requirements. No, they've simply taken the cheap option and removed it entirely. And I'm appalled that this has been allowed to happen. And I'm frankly astounded that we are here today with no objections from our highway authority, who in my opinion usually get things pretty spot on when it comes to new development. You'll be told that you should consider the application in front of you, and I would argue that the pedestrian route in and out of Landscape Lane onto Long Lane should be within this application that is in front of you. Bearing in mind, it was within numerous previous documents on the planning portal. Long Lane is not the, Landscape Lane is not the popular cut through that the applicant has previously referred to in their mail drops. It's a single track lane that will still be a single track lane if this development did take place. Advertising it as an alternative route is entirely inappropriate and unhelpful. The junction at Saplers Road will continue to be unsafe and can only be delivered through third-party land acquisition. And to my knowledge, this also has neither been discussed or agreed in any way whatsoever with the property in question. However, even if it was, the exit onto Staplers Road would be just as dangerous as it is now, and regardless of visibility displays, would still be concealed to oncoming vehicles, especially those heading into Newport who have failed to slow down to the required speed limit. Then, of course, we have the Long Lane end of Landscape Lane, which seems to almost have been ignored. This end of the lane is already more used end of Landscape Lane, and this is used by vehicles and pedestrians, mainly because this leads to the local amenities. Please be under no illusion that this will not change, regardless of what is done at either end of the lane. Long Lane is a continued accident black spot and an endless concern to both me and the adjoining councillor and our residents. There have been numerous accidents over the last 12 months, and there have been numerous serious injuries and fatalities along Long Lane over the last 2 decades. This application fails to address any of this and will only add to the issue of safety when it opens Landscape Lane up to increased traffic and makes the lane faster. This lane provides a totally unsuitable shortcut, which is already a rat run, and changing the profile and providing a passing bay still does not change the fact that this is a single track lane. Newport has seen far more development and expansion than any other area of the island in the last few decades. In recent years, we've seen a hugely successful housing project at Pound Meadows and St George's Gate deliver houses for local people, and the only truly successful large social housing project in recent times. Landscape Lane is a semi-rural lane on the outskirts of Newport. It's narrow and, regardless of the information provided, has a historic hedgerow dating back to at least 1793, but was most likely in place back in the 1600s. And while not classed as ancient, that is exactly what it is. This parcel of land is part of a tenant farmer's property of third-generation farmers. The loss of this part of the land will have significant impact on the viability of future farming at this site. It will also open the door to the Cotton Trust to attempt further development of farmland along Long Lane. This land has always provided a high yield in farming terms and is referred to many times throughout the report as intensively farmed. Of the council's development policies within the core strategy, policy DM13 is enough in its own right to refuse this application alone. Would this development protect and enhance the integrity of the island's green infrastructure? Will it protect and enhance the production of food, fibre and fuel? My opinion is absolutely no. DM13 is the policy that protects our green spaces and our farmland and is strangely not mentioned in depth anywhere that I can find within the reports before you. The rural appearance of Landscape Lane is something that does need protection. The refuge that the hedgerow provides for wildlife constantly pushed away from more urban areas should not be overlooked or eroded by this type of planning creep. The entirely unnecessary removal of the hedgerow is nothing more than using a sledgehammer to crack a nut and is entirely unnecessary. The catastrophic damage to the landscape and the wildlife is not covered in the report and is only based on limited site visits, and the rest is based on desk-based assessments. Local people who live nearby are far more able to comment on what damage this will really cause. The harm that will be caused is far too great. The need for more housing that we all have to agree with and know is needed on this island is in no way improved by this development. It does not deliver any housing that we so badly need and provides nothing that we actually need in planning terms other than towards the housing target. The application has been stretched over 5 years back to the original application. Residents aren't NIMBYs, and the depth of feeling within all of the comments that have been submitted touch on every aspect of what is wrong with this application and how unsuitable this site is for development. It has attracted a huge amount of comments and objections from the wider community. So I'm nearly finished. In summary, junctions onto 2 very busy roads will continue to be unsafe and will in fact be made worse. Pedestrian routes in and out of the site do not provide a satisfactory or fully sustainable route. So-called improvements to include a safe crossing on Staplers Road are not good enough, and nor is the absence of an adequate footpath to both bus stops. The local highway and footway network is not improved and is in fact disadvantaged by this application. The complete ignoring of the long lane connectivity is unbelievably dangerous and embarrassing. Nearby brownfield sites, derelict for many years, are still not developed. The removal of the whole hedgerow is damaging and entirely unnecessary. The rural appearance of the area will be damaged beyond repair. Given the issues of flooding, can we be absolutely sure that the full drainage scheme, which does not exist yet, can it cope with the surface water runoff? The loss of this portion of farmland without question do irreversible damage to the viability of this farmland for now and the future, and reduce the yield experienced by the farmer in recent times. The development does not provide any development we need, nor does it provide anything that local people are likely to be able to afford. The application fails on several local planning policies, and examples of these are SP5. It would have adverse effect on the island's natural, historic and built environment. SP1, DM13, regarding all our aspects of green infrastructure, DM12, landscape and biodiversity, DM17, sustainable travel, as it would not provide a safe pedestrian link to Long Lane, as well as several other policies. In summary, this unwanted and unneeded development would provide far more harm than good. It offers no improvement to the local area, and there is nothing here that convinces anyone otherwise. Please, committee, I ask you to consider everything you hear here today, and I know and trust you will. And I would also like to extend my thanks to the planning officer for his time that he spent on this application with me and has always been willing to provide me with as much information as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. That concludes the public speaking element of this agenda item. So we turn now to the question part of proceedings. If I could just urge colleagues to keep questions direct, just so that it makes it a little easier for people to follow along at home. We have Councillor Churchman and then Councillor Quirk. Councillor Churchman.
Yes, down the road there is a small industrial unit which has very large lorries in and out, plus large vans, because it's a collection come stroke delivery centre for people like Amazon. Did Highways and the planning officers take this into account when they did their report, please?
Thank you, Councillor Churchman. Mr. Van Kunenberg.
Thank you, Councillor Churchman. Planning officers will take into account existing hire arrangements. Officers are aware of Long Lane Farm, which I believe is the site you're referring to. So yes, we would take into account the nature of nearby uses and also the nature of the highway network when we're assessing the suitability of the proposed access arrangements. Thank you.
Thank you. Supplementary, Councillor Churchman.
Yes, what concerns me is the sheer weight of traffic on that top section of the road. And it's, I think I just find it, as having driven down that road a lot, dangerous. And it, as I said, I just feel we're missing something here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk, then Councillor Brodie. Councillor Quirk.
Two questions. The first, it was stated that the new hedgerow would increase biodiversity. If you grubbed out the old hedgerow and it's compared to nothing, then yes, it probably does. But compared to a hedgerow that's been there for hundreds of years, that seems to be a totally fallacious claim. Would officers agree with that?
Mr. Van Cuylenburg.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. The ecology report sets out the fact that the hedgerow that's there is heavily maintained, it's heavily flailed, it's quite gappy, it's structurally poor and it's species poor. So the proposal is to put in a new hedgerow that would be better for biodiversity because it would allow it to have a better structure and also a better species mix. Thank you.
The second question, Councillor
Second
Quirk.
one, can we see the image of the site? Those of you who've been on committee for a while will know that this is a pet issue that I have, is that ribbon development leads to the diminishing of the boundaries between settlements, and it's sort of intrinsically not a good thing, and you then excludes the development of the site. Am I right in thinking that the ownership of the site includes the area behind the proposed development area?
Thank you. Mr. Van Cuylenburg.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. My understanding is that the applicants do own additional land. I don't have any information with me that would confirm the extent of that ownership. And ultimately, having looked at the application form, notice was served on other owners as well. So, you know, what's before the council now is the application site in red, and the applicants own and have served appropriate notice on the owners of that land. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brodie, then Councillor Jones-Evans and Councillor Ellis. Councillor Brodie.
Thank you, Chair. In the officer's presentation, there was a lot of emphasis on the Staplers Road end and safety issues for pedestrians, bus users, etc. But we had very little said to us about the other end, the Long Lane end. I've walked down Landscape Lane many times. You know, I live reasonably near, and as people know, my ward is the other side of Long Lane. Crossing Long Lane at that point, where there are two bus stops, is quite a dangerous activity, I would say, given the amount of speeding traffic that uses Long Lane when people are leaving or coming into Newport. There was no mention about how there might be any improvements there, so that if you wanted to get a bus on the other side of the Long Lane, because there is a bus route there, it's not just on Staplers Road, how would people get across there more safely? Are we missing a trick here in not trying to get some sort of improvement there? Maybe a pedestrian crossing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. Mr. Van Cuylenburg, could you speak to that, maybe elucidate as well, just in terms of what might be a possibility in terms of those safety issues Councillor Brodie identifies? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. Officers did spend quite considerable time looking at the Long Lane end with the applicants. Initially, it was proposed to try and get a pedestrian route to there and to provide a crossing point, uncontrolled crossing point, similar to Staplers Road. The issue became, as I tried to explain earlier, that with the land in the highway and the applicant's ownership, it was not possible to provide such a facility that would be safety compliant. Ultimately, it would have provided a risk of larger vehicles overrunning the footway, potentially conflicting with pedestrians using that route. That was a highways objection. Officers took a decision that ultimately, without that route being proposed, the gains from a highways perspective would have offered significant improvements, irrespective of that route being achieved. We have proposed a pedestrian route that links to Staplers. There is a regular bus service there between Newport and Ryde that would be accessible from the application site. It would also provide a controlled and uncontrolled crossing point to the footway network on Staplers Road. So, as members will recall from knowledge of the area, there are existing properties along Staplers Road that currently would access that footway and those bus services to access other community facilities. This development would be able to do that with the provisions that are proposed. Yes, there would be no pavement route along Landscape Lane towards Long Lane. However, in officers' view, if we were to propose improvements and at that end, it would potentially further encourage residents to utilise that route other than the other end where we're currently proposing safety improvements. If they go to Staplers, they're still able to access local footpaths, they're still able to access the bus route. Therefore, it will promote sustainable travel compared to the current situation, and a development would be serviced by adequate pedestrian networks and on-site and nearby bus routes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Killenberg. Supplementary, yes.
Yeah, I'm just a little concerned at this dismissing of the bus route that uses Long Lane. Are you aware, Mr. Van Killenberg, of the bus route that the number 8 bus uses?
Thank you.
Yes, I am, Councillor Brady. Thank you. And I say, whilst improvements could be offered to provide a crossing point there, by promoting that route for this site, you would potentially encourage residents to utilise the unlit carriageway in that direction. Whereas at the moment, the provision that we are putting in would encourage residents to utilise a safer route to Staplers Road. That bus service could potentially still be used. It would be a more roundabout route, but you could access it by using the existing footpath network, albeit you'd have to go back on yourself.
Thank you.
Or access it from further down Staplers.
Thank you. We turn then to Councillor Jones-Evans, followed by Councillor Ellis. Councillor Jones-Evans.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And I think I'm just picking up really on the thread, the two threads that sort of stick in my mind reading the report and listening to the submissions this afternoon, is about the pedestrian access and also the vehicle, the history of vehicle incidents. And I've just been on crash map just to double check, and that I can't. It goes up in 2022, but I couldn't see any incidents on Landscape Lane itself. So whether there was something post 2022, so I'd like to know that. And if you could just go over again with me, please, the pedestrian access along the new proposed pedestrian access, please, along Landscape Lane. And I've got a supplementary now.
Certainly. Thank you, Councillor Jones-Evans. Mr. Van Killenberg, are you able to speak to that first question? Thank you.
Great, Councillor Evans. I was just chatting to my Island Roads. They've advised me that we don't have any more recent up-to-date accident data than what you would have observed. That apparently we would be about 6 months behind on data.
We got to 2022, so you've got up to 6 months ago, and there's been no incidents on Landscape Lane. Is that right? You're saying?
On the last report I put in to the planning authority, we're up to date on the records we had, and that was around about, I think, 6 months ago. So the issue we've got nothing new reported since that.
Yeah, sorry. Could I speak up, Mr. Chairman? I know the microphones aren't the best. Thank you.
I was just explaining. I believe the last response I put back to the planning authority was about 6 to 8 months ago. I'm not aware there have been any changes to accident collision data in that area since then. The problem we tend to have is the police have 6 months to report information, so we will always be 6 months behind on what the actual situation would be anyway.
Thank you. So, yes, and I'll invite Ben Guard, our legal officer. Guard.
Sorry, just quickly on the data point, I'm looking at colleagues here. That, of course, could only be reportable data anyway. So I'll just make that point. Is that the data that you'll have, even if it is there, is only reportable data that you'd have anyway. So it can't be taken that there's no incidents at all on Landscape Lane, but that would be reportable data that you have before you.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Guard. Thank you. Yes, so looking at the these incidents, and there was serious at either end onto Long Lane and to Staplers. Given the improvements on the display area, the junction of Staplers and Landscape Lane, report says that will improve the visibility that end, but the other end there's no need to do the onto Landscape Lane onto Staplers. There's no need. Sorry, Landscape Lane onto Long Lane. There's no need to do any more improvements there because the visibility is in fact that's correct, isn't it? What I'm saying. Okay, thank you. To clarify those points in my head. And could you just please just go on to the pedestrian, please, Mr. Van Kuylenberg.
Is that the diagram you had in mind? Yeah. Oh, microphone, please, Councillor Jones Evans.
Sorry, I want to know where the new pedestrian access on Landscape Lane is. So there's a new footpath going on the road. Is that correct? Sorry to be so obtuse.
That's correct. So here's Staplers Road. Yeah. So this is the existing substation. So this is the northern end of the site. So the application would have its footpath come through the trees. The off-site trees are kind of in this area here. So the footpath is through where the existing hedgerow is effectively, and then it turns the corner up where the substation currently is. And then there's an uncontrolled crossing point proposed that would cross the road at this point, or a point that's agreed with highways, to the footpath network that's on the other side of the road.
Microphone, please. Sorry. Thank you.
The new footpath goes all along in front of the proposed development along Long Lane.
Correct.
Yeah, sorry, Landscape Lane. Thank you.
Thank you. Turn now to Councillor Ellis. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. My question is around drainage. So I've read in the report that Southern Water has advised it is unable to comment until details of the proposed means of disposal of foul surface water drainage from the site has been provided. I've also heard it suggested this afternoon that SUDs are not viable for this site, which I find very concerning, and the suggestion that the development would be relying on a combined sewer. Can somebody just confirm that that's right, please?
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Mr. Van Kuylenberg, can you speak to that?
Thank you. Generally, my knowledge of the geology around this area is it's not great for what we call infiltration, so that's water penetration into the ground. And so it's not correct that SUDs wouldn't necessarily be possible, but the form of those SUDs wouldn't necessarily be in terms of infiltration. So you'd be looking at more sort of water storage on site, and then controlling the rate of runoff to the sewer. So, whilst the proposal currently would be to potentially look at there's no water course here that we're aware of, so you'd be looking at putting it into the existing sewer system, and that would be ultimately a matter for the developer and Southern Water. There is a planning condition that's recommended, so effectively that will say no development shall begin until we've agreed that drainage scheme. Southern Water would have the opportunity to comment on the detailed drainage scheme when that's put to the local planning authority for approval.
Thank you. Supplementary.
So, apologies, am I right then to understand that there is a possibility that the developer might put in water storage solutions, or has that not been considered yet?
Thank you. Mr. Van Kuylenberg.
Thank you. Normally we would consider the detailed design of the drainage scheme through the planning condition approval process. So it would be brought forward for approval later. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Spink, then Councillor Spink.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Van Kuylenberg, could you put up, please, the plan that we had up when Councillor Jones Evans asked you some questions? That one, yeah, thank you. Now, on behalf of one of the residents, in fact, the lady, Mrs. Lowe, who made who addressed us, a planning consultant was appointed, and he's put in a letter of objection on her behalf. I just want to understand if that objection's been taken into account. It's in relation to the uncontrolled pedestrian crossing on Staplers Road. And I'm sure you'll be aware, Mr. Van Coulenberg, that he's carried out measurements, and his conclusion is that that crossing wouldn't be where it's shown. It would actually be going across and ending, as it were, in the driveway of one of the houses. And that the measurements are out. No doubt you've read that statement. It was a quite recent statement. Has anyone checked those measurements? I don't know if they're right or wrong, but it's a fairly respected local planning consultant who seems to have done a great deal of work and says that that crossing isn't attainable.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. Mr. Van Coulenberg, you were able to speak to that.
Can I speak? Yes, we have seen the objection. We have considered it. I think the point I would make is that the precise positioning of that crossing is to be agreed. I think the point that it's making is that the width of the crossover to that driveway on the highway may not be 100% accurate on the drawing that was put forward by the applicant. However, the point I'd make is that the crossing would happen on would affect off-site highway land effectively, and that we would agree the precise positioning, design and construction of that and any alterations associated with the highway network through the associated Section 106 agreement and any necessary highways agreement that would be done between the applicant and developer and the highway authority.
You'd supplementary, Councillor Spink.
Yes, please. The point that he was making, though, the planning consultant was that you've got a row of houses with dropped curves going up to their driveways. And that he was saying that there's only limited space between where it's shown here and the substation. And he is quite clear in his statement, I would suggest, that there's no opportunity to land, as it were, that crossing on the other side of the road, other than on a drop curb on someone's driveway. And that it simply isn't practical or viable. Now, that's something I would suggest that we need to determine tonight rather than leave to a planning condition or I think that's, on reserve matters, it's usually access, which is the most important. So I am concerned, and if you're not able to assure me that that can take place, that is, I say the controlled crossing can take place, then that would have a very clear effect on the way that I will be voting.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. I see that Mr. Van Coulenberg's been conferring with our Island Rose representative, so I'll allow them a few moments to continue on that point. I think that the question you raise is an important one. Mr. Van Coulenberg?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I was speaking to Island Roads. Effectively what we would say is that there is room, if I just show you here, so there would be room to modify this arrangement through here to enable the pedestrian crossing to be positioned appropriately between driveways on the other side of the road and to enable a safe crossing point to this side of the footway.
Thank you. Maybe this is something we can ventilate further in the discussion as well. I'm keen to give everyone a bite of the cherry in terms of questions, so I can certainly come back to you, Councillor Spink. Councillor Quirk.
Just a question on process, really. Ollie might want to listen to this question.
I can give you a few seconds to
We've got the new MPPF, which is now active. Just to clarify the standing of the various rules and regulations that we operate under, the existing island plan is still in situ. We can base decisions on that, but have to give consideration to whether the requirements of the plan are outdated and put an appropriate weighting on for that. we can be cognizant of things that are in the new submitted document, but we can't rely upon them. And we have to observe the requirements of the new MPPF, although they are largely, as far as I can see, strategic, but we should be cognizant of the spirit of what is in there. Is that a fair assessment of how we should make our decisions?
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Mr. Porter, would you like to speak to that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I can confirm, Councillor Quirk, that on the whole, that's a very good summary of the situation. I think there's just a couple of points that I would highlight in terms of that. One would be the weight that the decision maker would give to the emerging policies of the island planning strategy. I don't think it is correct for it to be said that you cannot give weight to them. I think the fairer representation would be that you will need to consider carefully the nature of the policy, the level of representation received, whether for or against that policy, and the nature of the issue that you are applying that policy to. So I think it is one where the decision maker could choose to apply weight to that emerging policy. Whether they should or whether that could withstand scrutiny is then a slightly different question again. I think the second point that I would just raise is, again, I think you're absolutely right. On the whole, a lot of the changes in the MPPF that we've seen relate to plan making and strategic level approaches, as members will appreciate, and hopefully as would have been drawn out, excuse me, through the circulated briefing note. There are some fundamental points, however, within that where I think it's fair to say that officers take the view that the weight that we would give to certain matters would change. But again, I think that will work through in terms of any consideration and recommendation that may come through the committee's debate and discussion on the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Voss. Supplementary, Councillor Quirk. Councillor Churchman, your question, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to check, please, settlement boundary. Is it inside or outside the settlement boundary, please?
Thank you. Vankenberg.
It's outside but adjacent to, with Landscape Lane effectively being the boundary.
Supplementary.
So it's outside the settlement boundary. So
Outside and adjacent.
It is adjacent, and the matter is covered in para 7.3 of the report.
next question is, as it's adjacent, if these houses are built, does the settlement boundary move with the houses?
You know, Mr. Vankenberg.
No.
Thank you.
So the answer is no, the settlement boundary doesn't move. Those houses technically will always be outside
Yes,
the
the
settlement
boundary
boundary.
stays where the boundary is.
I'm just thinking, yes. I don't know whether it's relevant, but why such one small area of a field? I'm thinking of Westridge.
Certainly
Thank you, Chair.
a question we can explore in the discussion element of this agenda item. I think it's a good point. Councillor Oliver and then Councillor Jones-Evans. Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. Just confirmation on land ownership, please. There's a potential that the safety crossing and that has to be moved on the Staplers end of it. We've already got an issue with the land ownership on the Long Lane end, so we can't do what we need to do with safety and the access from that. Does the applicant actually own the land required to make the move onto Staplers?
Thank you, Mr. Van Cullenberg.
The land required to do that is either within the highway or the applicant's ownership.
Supplementary. Councillor Jones-Evans.
Thank you. Regarding these improvements, highways improvements, and so I haven't got the bit of a report up at the minute. Just regarding conditions, at what point do they have to be done? Highways improvements, is it prior to build or prior to people taking ownership?
Thank you. Mr. Van Cullenberg has been consults the actual statements in relation to the same. Whilst doing so, we have Councillor Stewart, then Councillor.
I've got a supplementary, if I may.
Yes, no, certainly. I was just elucidating who's speaking. It's Mr. Van Killenberg.
Sorry, condition 11 set out in a report says that no dwelling shall be occupied until the means of vehicle and pedestrian access on the public highway and on-site parking and turning has been provided in accordance with the approved plans. So
supplementary.
Helpful. I just wanted to bottom out the issue regarding the hedgerow in my head. So reading what the archaeologists have said and on the environmental report as well, although this hedge has been in previous old maps, the hedge itself isn't of a great value as in its condition and the planting in it. I've been looking at it now on a 2021 map, street view. You see lots of sycamore in the hedge as well. So I guess my question is, an ancient hedgerow isn't the same as an ancient woodland. Ancient woodland, you have trees that have been there for many hundreds of years, but I'm guessing hedges don't last that long and they regenerate and can be repopulated. So it's in my head, I'm thinking Trigger's broom. So it's the same hedge, but it's not the same hedge. But what is proposed here is a new hedge just set back to allow for the footpath and visibility space, but also it will be a higher quality. So it'll be more native species and will allow for, I guess, better biodiversity from, animal biodiversity because of the species that will be introduced. Have I got the right end of that stick?
Thank you, Mr. Van Killenberg.
yeah, so I think you're right in terms of the proposals. So the hedgerow along there would be removed where it's indicated on the plans, which is for most of the length. A new hedgerow would be proposed in the positions indicated. Landscaping is reserved, so obviously the final details of landscaping will be approved later under reserve matters. But the proposal is to plant a more species-rich hedgerow, which would be native species, which would improve the biodiversity of the hedgerow that would be put back ultimately. And members note on the plans that this hedgerow is proposed between gardens and at the rear as well. So there would be more planting, put around rather than just necessarily just along the roadside. And in terms of, I think, referring to sort of ancient nature, historic nature of hedgerows, I think, we're talking about the hedgerow regulations define important hedgerows, and a hedgerow can be protected whether it's important or not. I think that's why obviously members need to consider hedgerow loss through this planning application, because hedgerow regulations will allow hedgerow to be removed if it's in aid of a planning consent ultimately. And the criteria set out in the hedgerow regulations for an important hedgerow, officers have considered obviously the information that has been provided by the applicant, as well as comments made by the council's archaeologist and county records officer. We put forward in the report that in our view, having considered that information, it would not meet the criteria. There's no sufficient evidence that it would meet the criteria of an important hedgerow under those regulations.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, then Councillor Critchison. Councillor Stewart.
It's very straightforward, so thank you, Chair. We've got down contributions specifically in on page 17, which specify mitigation contribution for SPA of 10,348, rights of way 6,000, it's fairly straightforward. And it mentions affordable housing contribution. I may have missed it, so can you confirm if there's any indicative figure for that?
Thank you. Mr. Van Killenberg.
Thank you. I don't have an indicative figure. It's done on a calculation. So it's a financial contribution in line with the council supplementary planning document. And effectively, that works off of the final sort of sale or market value of the property at the point of sale or completion. And it's normally minus a threshold of 100,000 and times 3%. So, effectively, we would work out the contribution on a dwelling per dwelling basis as they are, prior to them being occupied and sold.
Thank you. Supplementary.
So a quick back of the envelope estimate would give you a figure of between 3 and 3.5 million based on what you were saying just now. So approximately, and I'm not going to hold you to the figure because obviously you would calculate that, the planning department will eventually calculate that, but what sort of figure are we likely to be looking at as a benefit towards affordable housing?
Are you able to give a rough indication? I appreciate we don't want to speculate too greatly. Mr. Van Killenberg.
So I'm not going to give a figure because ultimately it depends on what the price is sell for, but ultimately the figure that will be achieved will be what is compliant with the council's SPD policy.
Thank you. I think, I mean, it's certainly a matter that can be raised in the debates. Councillor Critchinson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to be clear that the refusal of the application in December, what the refusal reasons were, what has now come back is just taken out the pedestrian bit on Long Lane. Was that why it was refused? And they've taken that out and put this back in without addressing those issues.
Thank you, Councillor Critchinson. Can you speak to that and perhaps just more widely the history in terms of the application and how it's been dealt with? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Critchinson. I mean, the original application back in 2019, or whatever it was, the original one, was refused on several grounds. Some of that was highways, and ultimately the reasons before were getting those acceptable arrangements in terms of pedestrian connectivity, safe access routes. There were issues raised about lack of information around the nature of the hedgerow. So we'd raised concerns about that, ultimately, which this application has provided more information on. Concerns were raised about the layout and the impact on character. So that was raised as a concern. There have been changes made. There's been a reduction of dwellings. There's been less hard landscaping. There's been changes to the layout, a lot less surfacing particularly, and more areas of soft landscaping in the development. So there were multiple reasons that were put for refusal last time. However, officers have worked with the applicant. We've looked at the various issues that were raised before, and we now feel that the proposal that's before you, on balance, is acceptable.
Thank you. Supplementary, Councillor Critchinson.
There was. Did that come to planning committee last time? Was that an officer refusal?
There was a delegated decision.
Thank you. Councillor Spink.
Thank you, Chair. I've managed now to get up on my phone the report of the planning consultant. And he has carried out very detailed measurements. May I just read it very briefly, part of it? He makes the comment that his client is now subjected to a third plan. Then he says the applicant's latest location plan on drawing number ending in 06J, which is the one that came up when I last asked the questions, uploaded on the 26th of September, shows a small sliver of unregistered land within the red line area on the corner of Landscape Lane and Staplers Road, intended for access to a proposed pedestrian crossing. In fact, there is no space to create any kind of standards compliant pedestrian crossing there, as shown in the photos below, which planning committee would have seen because they're on the website. The land between the junction and the electricity substation is directly opposite an existing residential driveway with a drop curb at 193 Staplers Road. The layout of the existing residential property precludes any alternative driveway arrangement which might support the provision of a pedestrian crossing, even supposing a future owner of that property was willing to agree to a redesign of their highway. And then he says,
I could push you to a question, Councillor.
Well, I'm just going to ask you if all of, because I don't, if I may, as this garden and driveway on the north side of Staplers Road is not included within the red line on the application's location plan, is not necessarily subject. So that's simply dealing with, he's dealing there with it. He also takes very careful measurements. I don't want to take up unnecessary time, but I am concerned because it's a very thorough report with many photographs, and he's carried out measurements. So, and he's shown one photograph has got his measurement staff, and there simply is not room. I suggest, Mr. Van Cuylenburg, you said to move the controlled, the uncontrolled crossing further along the road in the direction of the substation. There's no room to do that, A, because the substation sticks out, and B, because the driveway width takes up the available room. That's on the statement. Are you seriously taking issue with that? Or is Island Road seriously taking issue with that? Because I'd like to know whether you agree with this statement or not.
I think it's certainly a question that let's try to take something of the emotion out of it, but I appreciate that it's a valid point in the sense of it's a battle of forms between one expert potentially and others. I don't know whether Mr. Van Kunenberg, you're able to speak to that or perhaps just reserve that for a wider ventilation in the debate, Mr. Van Kunenberg.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's difficult to speculate on the precise requirements of the crossing at this stage because I'm not an engineer and it hasn't been designed. So the precise space requirements for it are unknown at this moment in time. I'm looking at Google Street imagery at the moment of the road, and there would appear, in my view, to be space to provide a crossing, and potentially the area that is opposite these driveways is within the control of the highway authority. So ultimately, my view would be that there would appear to be adequate space to provide a crossing utilising highway land and land on the opposite side of the road. If members are concerned about the deliverability of that, then officers could ensure that the requirement to design that and provide it, or at least design it, is done before any development takes place. That is certainly within the gift of the committee to ensure that a condition is appropriately worded if there's any doubt of that being delivered.
Thank you. Well, on that note, perhaps I will push us towards the debate element of the agenda because I think it's perhaps a good jumping off point. But yes,
Sorry, Chair,
Councillor Jones Evans.
one qualifying question, if I may, just going off what Councillor Spink was saying and to Mr. Van Kunenberg. I pulled up on street maps my street view myself, and right opposite the substation there appears to be a pavement and a not drop curb at all. So if I've got the right area, which I think I have. I just think it's helpful because it's difficult when people are saying there's drop curbs here. That there are, but there's also pavement and there's also lawn and hedges, and it's not all drop curbs. I think it's a bit. I'd be concerned if the committee was being led down a road that didn't have any sort of evidence behind it. That's all. So I just wanted to look for my own eyes.
Thank you. I think, ultimately, as you say, we've had consideration of all of the, hopefully as well, we've taken into consideration the other documents which have been submitted to the planning portal. So perhaps it's probably going to come down to a debate of where we inflect and what weight is placed on certain considerations. So let us move to the debates. I don't know if somebody wishes to commence things on that note, whether yourself, Councillor Jones Evans, because I think certainly you yourself and Councillor Spinker are tending towards the safety concerns, which have been well ventilated this afternoon. Councillor Churchman.
Just a quick question. How wide is Landscape Road? Forget the two junctions. What is the width of the road all the way down, please?
Thank you. Are you able to speak to that, Mr. Van Kunenberg?
Currently, it's single width, so it's currently about 3.5 to 4 metres, depending on the precise location you were in.
Thank you.
So that means that, in fact, two vehicles. I have driven down that road, and frankly, I hate it. Technically speaking, two vehicles cannot pass.
Thank you. Well, we shall commence the debate. I think my concerns are certainly around safety. I'm not satisfied in my mind that all of those issues have been fully answered. I would perhaps be considering about if we were looking to approve how that can be conditioned. But I think as chair, I'm going to try to stay out of the substantive aspects of the debate. But who would like to commence? Councillor Oliver.
I certainly agree with you, Chair. Certainly the Staplers End would need to be a condition within the application. My major concern is the other end of Landscape Lane as it comes down to Long Lane. In all realism, people living in those houses are not going to go to Staplers when they need to go. You've got a country park you've got the schools, you've got the shops, everything goes down the opposite end to where we're putting a crossing, or we're saying there might be a crossing. Everything will go the opposite way. I don't care what anybody says. Yeah, there needs to be some sort of control in, the Long Lane end of Landscape End, and the ownership of the land is not in the gift of the developers. And I have a major issue with that. On the connectivity with those houses in there, with going down into the back end of Newport, through what should be into the back of Pan Meadows and all through that area, which is where they're going to go for schools. They're not going to use Staplers Road. So I do have a major issue.
Thank you, Councillor Oliver. Councillor Brodie.
Yeah, it's quite a number of issues for me. As I alluded to earlier on, I am the adjacent member to Councillor Price's ward on the southern side, Long Lane being our boundary. And indeed, if anybody looked at the objections to this application, probably 2/3 of them came from my ward rather than Councillor Price's ward. That's people who live in the Buckbury Lane area or on the other side of Long Lane. And I mean, I fully understand the reasons why they made those objections. I'm not the local member, but I've taken that into account as I come along here tonight. I felt that when I was asking questions of the officer regarding the bus route, that although he knows the route of the number 8, he was dismissing entirely, and I entirely endorse what you said, Councillor Oliver. The number 8 is a much more about accessing services bus than the number 9, which runs up and down Staplers Road. That's a ride to Newport bus, goes the fastest way between the two towns, and goes directly into Newport bus station via the bottom of Staplers Road, Snooks Hill, Cottons Bridge, and up South Street. The number 8 goes down Long Lane, turns into Furlongs at the top of Pan, runs down Furlongs, goes right outside Barton Primary School, right outside Pan Stores, right outside the local fish and chip shop, right outside the hairdressers that lots of ladies in the area use as well, then continues down Furlongs, turns left into St George's Way, right into St George's Approach, to the back of Marks and Spencer, and turns into Church Lytton. So as you can see, it's a services bus rather than just a commuter bus. And I think it's important that we take into account that, as Councillor Oliver said, people will want to use that. And to access the other side of Long Lane to get a bus into Newport is dangerous. Believe you me, it is dangerous. Because what people aren't understanding here, as Councillor Price and I both know, because we've endeavoured to do things about this over recent years, is the speed of traffic coming out and going into Newport on both Long Lane and Staplers Road. I regularly get complaints from residents in my ward about the speed of traffic. Island Roads refuse to recognise it. The police refuse to access that. And yet we regularly read of accidents on Long Lane. It must be one every 3 months. There's probably no data yet. It's probably 2022. But there are accidents regularly on Long Lane. Not always at the urban end, but it's a busy, fast road. And I think we need to take that into account. And I don't think we are in this report. This site to me is, well, it's I normally support housing of any sort, provided there's affordable housing. But what I like to see is buildings. I'm not interested in amounts of money because I'm not sure it actually goes on affordable housing anyway. I've asked questions about that. I don't know where this money is. Seems to be a very secret pot of money that never seems to be spent on anything. I like to see bricks and mortar going up so there is affordable housing. There's not going to be because there's a tiny, small development anyway. So, I mean, as you can probably gather, although we have massive housing need on the island, it's not for this sort of housing. It really isn't. What we need is a housing for people that people can rent affordably, for young families.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. We've been seconded by Councillor Churchman. Councillor, do you wish to speak to the matter?
Yes, first of all, I agree entirely with what Councillor Brodie has said. I certainly don't see any advantage to the island of 12 houses. It is going to do nothing to support our housing shortage. The two large ones I can see becoming second homes or retirees. Our adult social care is overloaded now. These are not affordable houses in anybody's book on the site where they are. If we were going to build truly affordable housing here, I would put my hand up for it, but we need houses for people who live on the island. We can't grow our economy without housing our younger people. So, as I said, for all the reasons that Councillor Brodie has said, which safety to me is paramount as well, I personally am happy to support his recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Churchman. I will trespass on your indulgence, yourself and Councillor Brodie, just to invite other councillors to speak, because I think it is important, if they wish to, they have the opportunity to do so. Councillor Oliver, I don't know whether did you have your hand raised or you've retracted? Councillor Quirk. Councillor Quirk.
Going back to my questions about process, the new NPPF is saying that local planning authorities are instructed to meet an area's identified housing needs. I don't think this does. I think the issues addressed in our new plan do go a long way to do that. In our new plan, being outside the settlement boundary but adjacent to doesn't count for anything. In the old plan, yes, it does. And so you've got to, it's the weighting that you give to that issue. What's going to happen though, is if you build along the road, you're going to effectively make the land behind unusable as our land. And so it's wasted, so you've got a waste land there. And this is gross underdevelopment of the total site, not the site that they're putting forward to be developed, but the site that is in the ownership of the people behind the development. And what we need is 33%, 35% affordable housing or contribution from 60 houses, not for control. And we need them to be built for the island's needs, which is for a lot more smaller dwellings, whether they're flats or masonettes or small terrace houses. But we have an island need that the national formula for how you define it is totally inappropriate. But the genuine need on the island is to house 2,500 people on our housing list. And this will go nowhere to do that. I think it's gross underdevelopment of a site, the waste of a site that's is reasonably positioned in terms of the access to Newport. But I think it's a waste, and I'm not very happy with the whole concept of the development.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. So in terms of housing need and density and use thereof, are you proposing to request that's potentially added to Councillor Broder's motion, or microphone, please, Councillor Quirk.
With his agreement, I would add to Councillor Broder's suggestion that we put under development of the site as one of the reasons for opposing rejecting it.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, Councillor Brodie is considering that. I'll turn to Councillor Jones-Evans, then Councillor Oliver. Councillor Jones-Evans.
Thank you. Yeah, in an ideal world, looking at the pedestrian improvements here, you'd take edge of 52 Long Lane and create a pathway down from Landscape Lane down to the bus stop on that eastern edge there, western edge, sorry. And I can see that would make perfect sense. I hear what Councillor Brodie's saying, but I also look at the other improvements with this and the fact that we are providing housing, and you know, having taken everything on board, I think on balance, I do agree with Officer that there is a, you know, the balance is just about in favour of the improvements here. Having said that, there's a lot of feeling around the room, so you know, I'm not going to put up a counter proposal or anything, but just to say, in case there is a Councillor Brodie's motion does fall, I was just wondering whether we could put that condition in for the uncontrolled crossing on Staplers. When I look at Crash Map, there's actually more incidents on Staplers Road than there are on Long Lane. It only goes up to 2022, but when you look at it, there's lots of reds and yellows on Staplers Road just further up. So I think that would be a great improvement there. Again, this is just looking at Crash Map. It's not anything, it's not, I know it's just reports, and there are incidents that haven't been reported. I get that, but I'm just looking at the evidence I've got in front of me. So that's where I stand. I think that's really important, that I think Mr. Van Kynenberg did say that could be conditioned. So I'd like to have that as a backup, please, in case we don't get an opportunity.
Certainly, Councillor Jones. Yeah, I think that's, well, it's certainly something if in the event that Councillor Brodie's motion falls, then we can ventilate that, and I will give you the opportunity to do so. Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. I have a slight issue with the putting under development in on the proposal we've got there, purely because the safety issue is the main issue I have with actually turning this application down. Under development just increases that safety issue. And I think if we're going to say, well, we're turning it down on under development, putting 20 houses along there with even more children, unless we sort out the far end with Long Lane, then I don't think we've solved anything at all.
No, thank you, Councillor Oliver. It's a fair point. Councillor Brodie, I don't know if you had a chance to consider Councillor Quirk's.
Yes, I have. And whilst I would usually agree with Councillor Quirk whenever he mentions the issue of underdevelopment, I do think that the safety issue at the moment is the preeminent thing that I am concerned about. If we start talking about underdevelopment and developing the whole of that field, etc., and raises new issues, that's not the application that we have in front of us. I think I recall an application we dealt with a couple of years ago on Cows Road at Northwood, where they were looking to put executive style houses in a piece of land that could have had a lot more houses on. I don't think you get a lot, unless you stick a couple of blocks of flats up on this piece of land, you're not going to be able to develop any more than it is already suggested. So I would rather stick with the highway safety issues. I'm more than happy if somebody wants to propose it to include concerns regarding the the supposed pedestrian crossing. I think there are a number of issues around that. There was a former member of staff of this council who then moved to Island Roads, who I don't think he works there anymore, whose legacy is around the town I live in my own ward. Never have a pedestrian crossing within 10 metres of a junction. Everybody who's been around a while will know that. This is undoubtedly within 10 metres of the one on Passaplas Road is undoubtedly proposed to be within 10 metres. It just makes me wonder what sort of advice do we get from Island Road sometimes. That was a hard and fast rule. And I will mention, quite often you will lose a pedestrian crossing away from a desire line of pedestrians because of that hard and fast rule. I'll give you two examples. They're both in Newport, but you will both know them. If you drive down Staples Road by St Paul's Church, which is on boundary again between mine and Councillor Price's ward, the pedestrian crossing is in totally the wrong place for pedestrians. Pedestrians cross everywhere else but the pedestrian crossing. Similarly, there's a crossing to the back of Marks and Spencer's near Medina Avenue in your ward, which is totally out of the right way of where people cross, and they cross elsewhere. Both of them were put in place because of this former member of staff at Island Roads with his 10 metres rule. I don't believe this one that's suggested is the 10 metres away as that now forward. If somebody wants to add that in somehow, if we can, that would be helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Brody, I'll just take some advice from officers and also in relation to the form of words in general with regards to your proposal, your motion. Thank you for your indulgence. Are there any other colleagues who wish to speak before we go to a vote? Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm really struggling with balance of this one, and I do agree, and I listen to arguments that the safety aspect of it is really crucial here. But I'm a little bit concerned that the mitigations that are being put forward rest on unmanned pedestrian crossings. And I know we take our advice highways and island roads, but as somebody who was very nearly mown down on a well-sited crossing, I drive into County Hall along Long Lane, so I'm very, very familiar with that end of Landscape Lane. There is the argument that, to be fair, if I lived along there, I would not that exit dangerous. So the fact that it's been, there could I would not life in my even on a pedestrian there. So I'm, as I say, I'm really struggling with the balance here and patients face. But one also has to choice of residents and their judgment call well. And I know that we can guide and we can do it. The number 8 actually does, I believe, those services, and that's I don't think that's particularly helpful, but that's
Andre, I think hearing the, as it were, section of the particular, I mean, you can have, I don't know whether it, which focused my office together, so I,
Thank you, Chair. I'll just perhaps the votes. One is eight. 9 of the report. Address some concerns I have. Equally, from heard and following Councillor Brooks' seconded motion, correctly, I think a words would be, the application would be used, and the proposal would fail to make safe pedestrian access detrimental.
thank you very much.
That just as Travellers Road. In terms of the platform as ever, are more.
Councillor, secondly, your that basis and then. So I've been advised that we need a names, but in which around the room. So the proposal from Councillor Brodie, seconded by Councillor Jets on the dustbin. Churchman. Ellis. Evans.
Against.
Buck. That will be abstaining as objective. So Councillor Brodie needs. We will now have a 10-minute break. Well, I'll extend a little. So 6. time, but second proceedings which and to the east Birch Close and Brilliant Garden 24010. So what?
Apologies, that was completely my fault. IT illiterate. Right, so the planning application site relates to land at Birch Close, which some councillors on the planning committee may remember gained planning consent, having been to planning committee in February 2021. When it was approved, Island Roads requested a condition to impose some parking restrictions in the existing access road into Birch Close. And that ended up being condition 11. And the proposal is to vary that. That condition requires a traffic regulation order to be agreed prior to commencement. The applicant is seeking to slightly change that trigger to change it to prior to the occupation of the housing. So I won't go through all the normal designations and everything for this site because we are looking at that particular condition. But the application site is just shown in locational terms. Firstly, in the larger map here, you can see at the point of the red pointer here, this is where the application site is, and there's a slightly zoomed in version of the application site outlined in red, and where it just says close here at the point of the cursor is where Birch Close is. Right, and then just for just to rehearse what was approved on site, the planning permission is for 44 houses in the layout shown on these slides, with 16 of those houses to be affordable housing. And then just an aerial photograph showing Birch Close as is at the moment. The application site is off to the right-hand side. It's got a slight hammerhead at one end, and you can see the properties alongside it with their driveways, and then junction onto Colwell Road. And that is the presentation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Short and sweet. We move then to the public speaking element of this agenda item. So if I could invite Mrs. Frances Turan to speak. Ms. Turan, you have 3 minutes when you commence. Thank you.
My name is Frances Turan and I live at Birch Close. The requirement for double yellow lines is not the only condition that can never be met. For example, the provision of pedestrian access south of the site in the interest of connectivity. The declared boundary, this needs to be assured before building commences. It is in nobody's interest to cause disruption to local amenity before all such requirements have been met in full. The declared boundary of the site entrance is false, as has been established by a professional surveyor based on the details in the title deeds of adjacent properties. It is narrower than previously claimed. The planned footpath would now be obscured by a boundary fence and the drainage cuts through my land, my home. This requires a complete re-examination of highway and pedestrian safety and not just a convenient juggling of parking controls. Birch Close has a turning point allowing vehicles to enter and leave safely without reversing into the major road. It also has a continuous footpath the length of the south side, which accommodates mobility vehicles. Birch Close is regularly used by churchgoers and the many residents attending its wide-ranging activities, for example, the food bank, Menin Sheds and children's clubs. A previous application to remove condition 11 was supported by a desktop survey which claimed lots of parking within walking distance of the development. It went to great lengths counting the roads and guessing how many cars could be accommodated. It identified 95 spaces, the majority being on private roads, leaving Cornwall Road as the only option. I remain deeply concerned about the flooding this development will cause. The developer altered the land levels adjacent to my property and filled in the ditch. This resulted in the collapse of my boundary wall, which needed to be rebuilt. Other residents have suffered damage to their properties and the expense of installing flood protection systems. A subsequent enforcement order to reinstate the ditch involved a contractor coming on site. The contractor did not know where the ditch was and had to be told where to dig. He said he was working on behalf of the bank that had repossessed the land. This application is as unprofessional as previous ones and, in my opinion, based on personal experience, should be declined. The original condition, although unpopular, was imposed with public safety in mind and therefore needs to be complied with in full. Better to maintain the status quo than risk an amendment with no guaranteed outcome. Thank you.
Very much. We turn now then to Ms. Hilary Hastings. Ms. Hastings, you have 3 minutes.
Hilary Hastings. I also live in Birch Close. This application is a flagrant attempt to wriggle out of the condition duly considered and imposed by the Isle of Wight Planning Committee. It is a no parking directive in the form of double yellow lines. This was imposed by the Planning Committee to address the vast uplift in traffic from 5 dwellings to 49, and allowing that the site entrance is extremely limited in width and can only accommodate single file traffic. It has long been known that the site entrance width had been wrongly declared and that it is even narrower than the original claimed. The planning officers were advised of this at the time of the original application in 2021, and again when the application to remove condition level 11 was proposed, and no action has been taken. An earlier application to remove this TRO sought to prove the abundance of parking available nearby at Birch Close, and that Birch Close did not attract public parking. All this submission did was highlight the fact that there are no other local legal parking spaces excepting on the Colwell Road, as all local roads within walking distance are private, except for Martine Close, which is too narrow. Colwell Road is the main route connecting Yarmouth to the ferries and the rest of the island. It is also a major bus route and is extremely busy during the tourist season. Now the applicant is proposing to alter the wording of the TRO to impose a similar restriction with different words, no waiting at any time, to enable the immediate building of 44 dwellings that cannot then be occupied. Yet another application will then be necessary, requiring the council to change condition 11 once more. That will advocate going against council policy and allowing the said double yellow lines in order to facilitate the new development. The idea that building process will not create a sizable uplift in the traffic is ludicrous. The constant movement of heavy equipment, site vehicles, delivery lorries and building workers far outweigh the level of traffic on a street with only 5 dwellings and orderly public parking. This committee imposed the condition because it was deemed necessary in the entrance of public safety, and nothing has changed. Therefore, there is therefore no valid reason to alter this condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dings. We turn now to Ms. Heather Rowell, speaking on behalf of Freshwater Parish Council. Or if I could ask you to turn your microphones off. Thank you very much. Apologies. So Ms. Heather Rowell is from Freshwater Parish Council. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you. Freshwater Parish Council attends this meeting on behalf of its residents and to give voice to their continued concerns regarding this development site. Our residents continue to believe that the site is unsuitable for planned development. However, the Parish Council accepts the validity of the planning consent. The Parish Council will limit our response to the concerns raised by the proposed variation of Condition 11 to allow the development to take place with a traffic regulation order to be in place prior to occupation of housing rather than prior to commencement of development. The importance of planning conditions is key to good development and to mitigate any impacts. Planning application was given full planning permission by the LPA Planning Committee on the recommendation of the planning officers. The committee considered the report produced at that time by officers and agreed to the consent with the planning conditions attached. As such, it is considered that the conditions were deemed appropriate and proportionate. The Town and Country Planning Pre-Commencement Conditions Regulations 2018 states, a pre-commencement condition must not be imposed on the grant of permission without the written agreement of the applicant. Therefore, it is clear to the Parish Council that both the Isle of Wight Council and the applicant agreed that this condition was necessary and appropriate for the consent to be given. The Parish Council would like to clarify that there have been no material changes to the site since the planning consent was given. This is nothing more than an attempt to circumvent the condition. The Parish Council remains concerned that a decision today in favour of the applicant will not result in the agreement by the Isle of Wight Council to consent to a TRO being approved for development to proceed. Our residents will continue to live with uncertainty. The Parish Council considers that the TROs should be acquired prior to the commencement of the site being developed. This would give certainty to all affected by any possible TRO. The applicant acknowledges there is an issue because they themselves are suggesting a temporary TRO is necessary. Removal of this TRO prior to commencement achieves nothing more than removing democratic and public scrutiny. Freshwater Parish Council requests on behalf of the residents of the parish, the Planning Committee refuse the application for the reasons given here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We turn then to Mr. Matt Holmes, who's the agent. Mr. Holmes, you have 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. Members, this application seeks permission for a variation of Condition 11 of the original planning permission on this site for the construction of 44 homes. Condition 11 requires a traffic regulation order to be agreed with the authority before work starts and for the development to not be occupied until the order has been implemented. The applicants intend to commence development work next year. All other pre-commencement conditions have either already been discharged or the details are lodged with your planning department as we speak. Members will be aware that a variation of condition application of this type would not typically be referred to the planning committee for a decision. However, in this case, the application has generated a number of objections from neighbours. A number of those objections and the comments from the parish council refer in part to traffic during the construction period. Members, I draw your attention to the wording of condition 11 shown at paragraph 3.1 of the officer's report. There are two elements to condition 11 as it currently stands. First is to require a TRO to be agreed with the local authority before work starts. The requirement is to agree the TRO prior to commencement, not to implement it. The second element of the condition requires the TRO to have been implemented prior to the occupation of the development. The condition does not require the TRO to be implemented prior to the commencement of the development, nor at any time during the construction phase, only when the houses are occupied. Construction phase traffic is dealt with separately under conditions 14 and 22 of the Planning Commission, which required the submission of a construction management plan and a construction environmental management plan prior to commencement of development. A plan has already been submitted and the conditions were discharged back in January of this year. The implementation deadline for the Planning Commission is approaching next year, and in view of the fact that a permanent TRO takes time to secure, it is considered appropriate to alter the wording of the condition so that the TRO does not have to be agreed prior to commencement. However, the application does not seek to change the requirement for the TRO to be implemented prior to the occupation of the homes. Therefore, this application has no impact whatsoever on when the TRO will be provided on the ground, and therefore has no impact either on the neighbouring properties or on highway safety. The existing requirement is for the TRO to be implemented prior to occupation of the new homes, and that will be unchanged. The development process for a site for this site will take a number of months, and therefore there is time to agree the TRO before it is required to be enacted. I note that a number of neighbour comments refer to the impacts of construction traffic, but I must re-stress that condition 11, as already written, is nothing to do with construction traffic. Construction traffic is dealt with through conditions 14 and 22, which have already been agreed, and the condition as originally written had no requirement for TRO to be in place during construction works. In fact, I would put to the committee that this application actually improves the situation for those residents concerned about construction traffic. Your officer's report includes the proposed amendment to condition 14 to require a temporary TRO to be secured to implement temporary parking restrictions within Birch Close during the construction phase. That requirement does not currently exist. So the addition of a temporary TRO requirement actually gives more control than the original permission provided for. Members, this application has no material impact on the surrounding properties relative to the original consent. The requirement for the permanent TRO to be in place prior to the occupation of the homes will remain. We are pleased to know that the Highways Officer agrees with our conclusions in this respect and that the Planning Officer has recommended that permission be granted. Ultimately, I would suggest it makes little difference when the TRO is agreed, so long as it is provided for prior to occupation, as has always been the intention. I therefore commend this application to you and would ask that you agree the minor revision to this condition as is recommended for approval in your officer's report so that the delivery of these much needed homes can continue in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. We turn now then to Councillor Chris Jarman, who is our local councillor. Councillor Jarman, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. Firstly, I have to note that the site plan, which was filed on the planning portal on the 14th of August 2024, does not accord with the land registry title documents. Specifically, as copied to Isle of Wight Council planning officers, the boundary with 4 Birch Close is false on that declaration. The 14th of August 2024 submission includes a width of Birch Close at the entrance to the field, which is wider than that available to the developer. You have in front of you the respective maps, I believe, which show the variation between the actual land registry document, which shows an intense narrowing of that entrance, and the submission that was made on that date. Those details of the land registry have been confirmed and marked by a local surveyor, and now a fence has been erected by the owner of that property accordingly. Secondly, as planning officers have included a retrospective Birch Close application in their report, in like manner it is, I would submit, and as has been brought up already this evening, relevant to consider some recent local actions of the applicant whose planning application is before you today. They are relevant as they go to the conditions imposed by this planning committee and the conduct in dealing with those conditions. The applicant has a complex company structure that is unclear to local residents, and it is equally unclear if they remain trading. This is relevant as we have been unable to confirm if an application submitted under the name of an applicant no longer trading or submitted to other winding up orders remains valid. Our assumption, however, is that it does. The applicant for this change of condition is linked to Shorefix Isle of Wight Limited, who are subject on the 1st of November 2024 to a court winding up order. and other Tallulah Assets Limited are now dissolved. Yet another, Journey Building Contractors Limited, are subject to the receiver action, whose details confirmed on Companies House today. You have heard of the digger operator recently accessed through Birch Close, who stated to residents that he'd been instructed by the bank who are now in possession of the site. I trust you will have noted the reference made this evening to the very recent enforcement action by Isle of Wight Council following the levelling up on the site and infilling of drainage ditches, contrary to pre-commencement conditions. The drainage plan and other relevant conditions imposed by this planning committee on Birch Close have not been agreed or discharged. You have heard of the impact of those recent groundworks, which caused flooding on adjacent properties, great distress to residents, debris sweeping down Birch Close and Cornwall Road, blocking drains, and led to the destruction of domestic brick boundary walls due to the torrents of water. A shocking disregard for the conditions imposed and accepted by the applicant and of the well-being of residents. Thirdly, the local community accepted double yellow lines on the adjacent Cornwall Road, given the high speed of traffic there, a significant congestion and danger to other road users. The area is well known for its aged population and in consequence, a high percentage with mobility and accessibility challenges. Our local speed watch groups have this area under constant watch and have recorded significant speeding and dealt with this accordingly with the Isle of Wight Police. Having accepted the parking restrictions on Cornwall Road, the importance of small cul-de-sacs such as Birch Close is paramount. This is amplified as other local parking is very limited, as you've heard, on narrow or private roads, as you've heard, and some distance away. The many community support groups, charitable events and religious services held at Cornwall Baptist Church rely on Birch Close as a safe haven for their parking and likewise for their carers. The introduction of any form of parking on Birch Close would have a severe impact on the viability of events at Cornwall Baptist Church and necessitate the use of Cornwall Road, including for those with mobility, disabilities, and those not able to walk the additional distance. Whilst, as Island Roads correctly point out, change of condition would not have a specific danger in Birch Close, the frequent displacement of so many vulnerable people and their carers to Cornwall Road, a known dangerous road, would be a considerable danger to them and other road users. Fourthly, I point out that the application makes no provision whatsoever for mitigation of the impact of this measure on those residents or the safer, wider community use. Fifthly, as residents in Birch Close have made applications for disability bays, and those have been refused in Birch Close, citing the availability of unrestricted parking in that road. Any introduction of parking restrictions would overturn the basis for those refusals and necessitate reapplication by the residents, many of whom are infirm. The resultant granting of any disability parking application would negate any benefit derived by the application from this variation applied for this evening. This, of course, as you've heard, is not the only unfulfilled pre-commencement condition. You've heard of those that relate to safety, to pedestrian access, and to drainage, all of which remain unresolved. Sixthly, I would turn to the implications of this application, which would be apparent to any user of the number 7 or 12 Southern Vectis omnibus serving the West Wight. Such a blatant attempt to undermine and circumvent legally binding planning conditions accepted at the time of issuing the decision notice by the applicant would, quite possibly, result in the commencement of properties island-wide that could not be occupied. Whilst the resulting unoccupied properties might assist the Isle of Wight Council with the application of double council tax, the precedent this would set for our island could be a plethora of such circumstances and of planning committee conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Jarman. That concludes our public speaking elements for this agenda item. So we move to the question part of this matter. Any questions from us? If not, we'll move straight into the debate. Councillor Spink.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. I'd just like to ask some questions for clarification, really, and that's this. Just so that it's clear, the applicant applied for a traffic regulation order in accordance with the current condition number 11, and it's been refused by the cabinet. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, I understand it was.
And there's no right of appeal from that decision. And it was based, in part at least, on traffic safety, but also it's cabinet policy that you can't have a double yellow line restriction simply to enable development. The cabinet policy is that there has to be a pre-existing reason for granting it. And I just ask you if you'd agree with that policy.
Yes, if I can defer to Mr. Guard, as that perhaps touches more his remit, Mr. Guard.
Certainly.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's quite right in relation to the appeal point. There's no statutory right of appeal to a refusal to grant a traffic regulation order. There does lie a route of challenge to that, of course, through judicial review if the applicant felt that the decision was not made in accordance with policy or was otherwise unlawful or irrational. So there remains the prospect of a route of challenge to that decision, but no automatic right of appeal. So slightly different.
Thank you, Mr. Giles. Supplementary.
Well, I've got a number of questions and a supplementary in relation to that one, which I hadn't anticipated judicial review being brought up, but it's the cabinet decision was made, I don't have the date to hand, but over a year ago. Judicial review for planning matters have to be brought within 6 weeks, unless you can show strong reasons why the time limit should be extended. So I suggest that really the suggestion of judicial review in those circumstances would be highly unlikely.
Thank you, Councillor. That was a direct question, or I mean, yes.
Yeah, again, I don't have the date the cabinet decision was made, but I would agree with you that if it was made over a year ago, the time within which the that application can lawfully be made has come and passed. Yes.
Councillor Spink.
Oh, thank you, Chair. There was also an application to remove condition number 11 made by this applicant, and that also has been refused. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's set out in the report.
It is indeed. It's important, I think, to clarify it, so just bear with me if you will, please. And if cabinet policy is applied, any application for a TRO in the future, so when, for example, if this condition were to be allowed and the requirement for a traffic regulation order wasn't to be until the properties were ready to be occupied, the outcome would be likely to be in accordance with cabinet policy, namely it would be refused. And we would then have the position, would we not, of 44 houses which couldn't be occupied.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. I mean, I think the question of likelihood and chance is one that essentially may be down to a determination of colleagues. But I mean, ultimately, I would say the policy is not going to fetter the cabinet decision to the extent that they can make no other decision except to follow policy. But I take your point that it's perhaps likely, but that's probably going to be down to an estimation of colleagues as to how much weight they think that cabinet colleagues are going to apply to policy that's been promulgated and put out into the public area. But I will turn to Mr. Garden if he has anything to say.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think that the point was carefully made by Councillor Spink that he used the words likely, and that to me takes into account the fact that the policy, whilst the policy can't fetter the discretion of the Highways Authority in terms of what it has the power to do, it is, I think, not controversial that there is a policy in place that does provide that. So I let that point lie.
Thank you, Mr. Guard. I will, if I may, Councillor Spink, invite other colleagues and then come back to you if you have additional. But
at the end of that area of questions, so I won't necessarily have any more unless they arise out of additional questions from other members. Thank you,
Councillor Spink. Councillor Brodie.
Thank you, Chair. There's one issue before us tonight, so can I just confirm that land ownership issues, boundaries and ownership issues of any applicants are actually largely irrelevant to this application.
Thank you. Yeah. God, yes, Russell, Mr. Chick.
They're not completely irrelevant. So what a section 73 application must do is follow the site boundaries, of the original planning permission. And so Councillor Jarman's point does have a bit of weight to it, because having looked at the red line plan for the planning application, it is slightly different. I'll just show you the presentation now. The red line plan shown on this plan, which is the red line plan put forward by the applicant, is different to what was agreed towards the end of the planning application before it came to committee. So the concerns of the neighbour were noted when the planning application came to committee last time, and what you'll see is a slight kink was put in just here to reflect the actual land ownership. What officers would see as a resolution to this, for this planning application, would be for an alternative red line boundary plan to be submitted should committee look to approve the current section 73 to reflect this red line. That would be placed online for 14 days. And if no other material issues were raised that hadn't already been raised through the objections to the planning application, the application would be issued. If anything different did come in that was material to the planning application, given that this planning application can't open all of the other considerations for the original, then it would be reported back to committee.
Thank you, Chair. And Mr. Chick, I mean, that's very helpful indeed regarding the land boundary issue. But in terms of ownership, anybody can apply for planning an application provided they stump up the money, no matter what their status is. Is that correct?
Probably slightly missed the point of the question. I think what you're saying is the actual, who is the applicant, who owns the site? Yes, you're absolutely right. It's not a material consideration who that applicant is, what they've done in the past, whether we like them or not. They are the applicant. That is what it is, but the permission goes with the land, not with the person.
Thank you, Mr. Chick. Additional questions from colleagues? If not, we will move to the debate. We'll move. Yes, you were
just following on from that. Can you just help me with this? The original planning application was made by Tallulah Estates Limited. That's correct, I think. This application is made by Journey Estates Limited. And they say on the form that they're acting as an agent, but then the agent's details are given as Matthew Holmes of Spruce Town Planning Limited. Now, bearing in mind that this counts as a separate planning application as a matter of law, so there will then be in existence two applications. If this were to be allowed, there would then be in existence two planning consents, and the applicant could choose which consent they followed. Now, bearing in mind that it appears that we've got two different applicants, how would that work? Is it legal? I would suggest it's not. You can't have a separate applicant on a variation of a condition to the applicant who made the original application.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. I'll defer to Mr. Guard if you're happy to speak to that. Mr.
Yeah,
Guard.
absolutely. Absolutely fine. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I follow Councillor Spink what you say. I think there's one distinction in this, which isn't for the applicant to decide which permission to implement, but the landowner. And so the landowner, for the time being, will have the benefit of the planning permissions because they run with the land. So the identity of an applicant isn't really relevant in terms of which should be implemented, because ultimately it's for the landowner. An applicant couldn't just turn up onto the land and implement the permission without the permission of the landowner. And it's for applicants to satisfy themselves when they make planning applications that they have the appropriate agreements in place to purchase the land, or at least have control of it at the point that the application, if granted, is commenced. And so it's the landowner themselves that has that control and not the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Guard.
If I may,
Yes,
Chair. I don't want to labour this point, but with great respect, I'm not sure that's necessarily right. I can't say conclusively, but if there's planning consent that has been granted to Tallulah Estates, how can an entirely different applicant apply to change that consent? I understand that you can apply for planning permission on someone else's land. Whether you would be able to exercise that planning commission depends on the consent of the landowner. But here we've got, it's rather unusual. I've tried to find any example and have been unable to do so. It's rather unusual to have an application, to say the least, by a different legal entity to change a planning consent of a different, yet again, legal entity. Does seem strange to me, and I'm not sure that it's correct in the matter of law.
Going to invite Mr. Chick and Mr. Guard then, if he wishes to add anything in addition, Mr. Chick.
I mean, obviously I've been a planner for over 20 years, and it is very normal for a planning application to be put in for an area of land by a landowner, for them to then sell it, and a developer to come in and then vary the conditions. So that's exactly what's happening in this case. So someone has applied for planning permission to vary a consent which goes with the land. It doesn't go with the person, it goes with the land. So it is wholly normal for someone else to come in and apply to vary a condition for a consent that was made by another entity. I don't know if Mr. Guard wants to add anything to that.
Mr. Guard?
No, nothing to add.
I think on that point, I will maybe move us on. I mean, it's perhaps something that can be ventilated in the debate, but any questions from colleagues? If not, we will move to the debate. Councillor Brodie. Councillor Brodie.
Yeah, yes. I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, we have one issue before us, and I just checked the minutes of the original meeting regarding this, which was November 21. I was at that meeting along with 4 of the members of this committee. The committee's changed quite a lot since then. It wasn't, the condition 11 wasn't something that we invented on the night. It was part of the report, as far as I can gather from the minutes. It was recommended by officers as being necessary. And frankly, I don't see what's changed. Yeah, if it was required then, we were advised it was required by professional officers. We went along with it. It was a contentious application. The vote was 8-4 in favour. I voted in favour. Some people on this committee voted against. But that was a condition that nobody questioned at the time. And frankly, I'm a little surprised that it's been recommended to be varied now, to be honest. And as ever, in an effort to try and focus us and to try and move things forward, I will make a proposal that we refuse this variation to change the terms of condition 11 on the grounds that I mean, I don't know if I can say it, nothing has changed, because I don't believe anything has changed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. I see, seconded by Councillor Spink, but I will invite Mr. Guard to speak to the point. Mr. Guard.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Although I do take the point made that not many Section 73 applications fall to this committee, and at risk of me having to make this point every time one does fall to committee, I had given some advice I think the previous planning committee around decision making on Section 73. And just to remind the committee, I'm going to just reiterate that, which is Section 73, subsection 2 of the Town and Country Planning Act, which guides this committee on how it should determine applications. Says this, it says, on an application, I'm going to paraphrase it first, but on an application under Section 73, the local planning authority shall consider only the question of the conditions subject to which planning permission should be granted, and if you decide that planning permission should be granted subject to conditions differing those subject to which the previous permission, or that it should be granted unconditionally, they shall grant planning. And this is the key motion is, if you, the planning committee, decide that planning permission should be granted subject to the same condition as those subject to which the previous permission was granted, they shall refuse the application. So that is a duty on this. Take into account the material planning consideration policy. If you conclude that permission should be granted subject to the same conditions
of those subject to which previous permission is granted, shall refuse the application.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. Yes, Mr. Guard. Sorry, Mr. Chick, I should say.
Okay, sorry. I just want to make something clear in that a planning application has been made, which is in front of you. And what the applicant is saying is that the condition that was imposed previously was required in relation to the dwellings. Island Roads confirmed that was the case. And therefore the impact, what the applicant is saying is that the impact that is to be mitigated by the original condition 11 actually doesn't happen until the dwellings are occupied. So that is the material change, in that the applicant has pointed out through their statement that the condition was imposed to mitigate the impact of the dwellings once occupied. That's the reason why they've proposed to change the trigger to the TRO being in place once they are occupied. So that is the material change. So I think what I would say is we're not in a situation where there has been no change. The applicant's statement and their application is a material consideration. And in fact, Island Road's comment on the planning application has agreed with what the applicant has said. Their comment says, yes, this condition was imposed because of the impact that would occur at the point of the houses being occupied. And so it would be important to take into account the comments made by Island Roads, which don't object to a change, but ultimately committee can make a decision that is contrary to what officers have recommended.
Thank you, Mr. Chick. So yes, Councillor Brody.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chick, for that. And I understand that entirely. It doesn't change my view that we should still refuse what I've proposed. And I think, I just reminded what Councillor Spink said. Essentially you're opening the door to developers in this sort of situation building houses that are either going to be left empty, or it's a form of blackmail, isn't it, to have empty houses when you've got a major housing crisis going on. So I mean, I continue to propose the motion, which I'm hoping for a form of wording that is better, an expected form of wording, but I would still formally propose that we refuse this application.
Thank you, Councillor Brody. I'll turn to Councillor Spink, who's been waiting patiently as he had seconded the motion, then Councillor Quirk. Councillor Spink.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a lot to add because it's a fairly straightforward realm that we can consider. I agree with Councillor Brody, and I'm grateful to him for raising the points that he has. This was the terms of the original condition were that no development shall take place until a traffic order has been secured. And it then goes on to talk about occupation, but it was quite a clear term that there should be no development to take place until a traffic regulation order has been secured. That traffic order has been turned down. It's likely to be turned down should it be made again. There is no realistic prospect of appeal or judicial review. And it would be, I suggest it would be quite irresponsible of this council to change a condition to enable the developer to go ahead and build property which would probably not be occupied, or alternatively would be used, as Councillor Brody has said, as a form of blackmail virtually, that we would have to agree now to a traffic regulation order. And don't forget what this is really about, if I could ask you, committee, and that is this: you have 3 years to commence planning permission. Those 3 year time expire in about 8 weeks, this February coming. This is a clear attempt not only to avoid a condition put on by a planning committee on the suggestion of Island Roads and the officer that it's necessary for road safety, but also to get round the 3 year limit. Now, the residents of Birch Close have been living under planning blight, I think it is, for a total of 4 years, from the date when it was the application was made, and the date when the decision notice was issued. And planning blight is very upsetting. I know some of the local residents because it's adjoins virtually my ward. And I would suggest enough's enough and ask you please to support Councillor Brady and my seconded motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. I'll turn quickly to Councillor Quirk, and then I think I will press to a vote. Councillor Quirk.
Partly said by Councillor Spink of being held to blackmail. I can only see that a developer wants to do this if they think that they can change it in the end. And if the council's policy is that they won't grant the order, then what's changed? And it seems absolutely pointless to change something and get these houses built, and they just sit there. And there will be tremendous pressure on us at that point to concede, and that's not the way it should work. That's unethical, and it's just not a good way to go forward. I support Councillor Brody.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. We have a form of words which officers have been working on, so I'll invite Mr. Bolter to enunciate that, and then if there are any additional questions, comments, we'll take those before going to the vote. But Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. And as before, if you may indulge me, I'm going to take a liberty and just speak to a couple more matters than simply suggested form of wording for councillors. And I would just be sure that the committee is receiving due caution against any speculation on potential outcomes, and the decision is based on the planning matters in front of you. And I would also simply highlight that there are two separate consenting regimes, one for planning applications, one for TROs, and they are separate and independent of each other. We mentioned earlier that these type of applications don't come along too often. Committee may remember that we had exactly this kind of situation at the last meeting, and I draw on the reasons for refusal on that particular matter, and as such I would suggest a form of wording, having listened to the discussion and the debate that reflects what Councillor Brody has put forward, and it is as follows. There have been no changes that were material to the original permission, and further the policy basis for applying the original conditions remain, and therefore permission should be granted subject to those conditions. Therefore, in accordance with section 73(2)(b) of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, the application must be refused. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. Councillor Brody, you're happy with that? Councillor Spink? Yes, splendid. So we move then to the vote, which is a motion to reject this application, and it will be a named vote. So I will go around the room again. So Councillor Andre.
For.
Councillor Bacon.
For.
Councillor Brody.
For.
Councillor Churchman. Councillor Critchison.
For.
Councillor Julie Jones-Evans.
Against.
Councillor Oliver.
For.
Councillor Quirk.
For.
Councillor Spink.
For.
Councillor Stewart.
For.
And as for myself, I will abstain for the reasons I outlined before in terms of impartiality. So that is carried. Thank you. We now move then to members' question time. Members of the public in the gallery and public speakers, if you wish to depart, you're certainly welcome to, or if you want to stay for further fun, please do. Additional comments? Well, I don't think we've had anything in writing. So any questions from colleagues? Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just relating to the changes to the NPPF recently, and the potential uplift in housing targets. I had a brief discussion with the head of planning before the meeting. I just wondered if it would be useful for members to understand where it leaves, or where it may potentially leave us in regards to the housing targets in particular, and whether that, we know we're still in the tilted balance, but it leaves us firmly in the tilted balance for an indefinite period, really, doesn't it? Because some of what is contained within the new planning strategy will obviously have to change.
Councillor Price, Mr. Walter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Price, for a particularly challenging question so close to home time, and I will endeavour to answer the best that I can. However, as I'm sure everyone will appreciate, the new NPPF landed less than a week ago, last Thursday, and as a sector, as a committee, as a local planning authority, we're all grappling with those changes to understand them both in the national and in the local context. So I think there are a couple of headline points that are worth making to us at the moment. Firstly is, and as it says in the briefing note, the December 24 NPPF is live from the date it was published. That is the document that, as the decision-making part of the local planning authority, we, both committee and officers under delegated, must be adhering to. The Island Plan Core Strategy, our current local plan, still remains in force. It is not simply a case of saying, because it is the new NPPF comes in, it is now completely out of date. We talked a little bit about it before in terms of the weight that the decision maker can still look to give to those policies where they are relevant. A slightly different approach is we are expecting, and I think it has recently been confirmed by the Inspectorate, will be taken in relation to the examination the island planning strategy, which you remember the question from the member of the public and the response that was read out. That was talking to that point. So day-to-day decision making, new NPPF, new standard method, a slightly different approach insofar as that is now the starting point. It is not advised, it is the starting point. It is a different calculation, it is a different number. We still remain under the presumption, operating under the presumption in favour of sustainable development, and so the situation hasn't changed in relation to that, and that's both in terms of the housing delivery test, I believe, and the 5-year land supply. It is slightly different for the island planning strategy. That is effectively locked in to the 2023 NPPF and the policy approaches set out in there. So the decision to move forward with the Regulation 19 period for representation and then submit effectively got us in under the previous approach. So essentially that's where we are. We are working, we've tried to give that initial flavour and very early sector understanding through the briefing note, and apologies, it was circulated late yesterday, but nonetheless we felt it was important that it was in front of you all, so you were aware, and we, as indicated, will work hard to bring you more information, hopefully some more detail about what that will mean in practice for our local level, for your local level decision making in advance of the next planning committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bolter, for that comprehensive answer. Supplementary, Councillor Price? No, any other colleagues? Councillor Churchman.
Are they talking about penalties if we fail to do this? Because there's no way we have the land, but there's no way we have the skilled, the materials, the workforce, etc., to build anything like what we have been told to build. So is there any indication of what could or would happen if we fail to carry out this? But I would add that whatever penalties may be made against us will apply to every single council in the land, because there is no way any county council across this country has the ability to hit any of these housing targets. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Churchman. Mr. Bolter, you'll speak to penalty potentially.
Yes. It is our reading thus far, Councillor Churchman, that the sanctions remain effectively the same. So that is maintain the presumption in favour of sustainable development, and you can qualify for that if your performance dips below what the government expect, both in relation to 5-year land supply and housing delivery test. So essentially, it remains the same, although obviously the implication of that with the new standard method and the higher number is that the bar to effectively potentially fall below will certainly for us be significantly higher. So it will be very challenging for us to move away from that. Hence, in part, the keenness to get the draft island planning strategy into the examination, because if that plan and the approach that we've articulated is accepted by the planning inspectorate, and then the draft island planning strategy is then adopted by full council, that will lock the housing number, that bar that we're then judged against for supply and delivery at one would suggest is a actually deliverable, manageable and deliverable level for the island. The government are or have been looking at potential further sanctions in terms of concern about gaming the system. So you'll all be familiar with the expression of 5-year land supply. You may remember that for a very small window, we did have some conversations about a 4-year land supply. Potentially in the future, we may well be having a conversation about a 6-year land supply. So in terms of government saying, if you're not giving us what we want and you again comply with certain criteria in terms of where you are at the plan making stage, then to make sure you don't try and game it, we're going to put that extra level of penalty on you again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bolter. We have 9 minutes before we need to seek an extension of time. So I don't know if there are any questions, perhaps if there are maybe brief ones, but seems to be not. So we'll draw matters to a conclusion. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.